Billionaire CEO followed his quiet secretary, and what he found made him fall in love. She left the office every day at exactly 5 p.m. No small talk, no friends, no traces. To everyone, she was just the quiet secretary. But one night, he followed her, not knowing that what he'd discover would change everything he thought he knew about her and about himself. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's get back to the story. It was already 5:04 p.m. when Richard looked up from his desk for the first time all afternoon. The low murmur of footsteps echoed through the corridor outside, the usual signs of the office emptying for the day. Phones hung up, chairs pushed in, but something pulled his attention to the window. Down in the parking lot, a small silver hatchback was pulling away, turning onto the main road. Helen's car. Of course it was. She always left right on time. 5 p.m. sharp. That was the thing about Helen. She never stayed late, never broke routine, never called attention to herself. And yet, for some reason, today, he noticed. Maybe it was the stillness she left behind. Maybe it was the way her chair sat, tucked in perfectly, her desk already cleared, as if she'd never been there at all. But she had been. Quietly, consistently. He couldn't remember the first day she started. But he remembered her presence. Calm, almost invisible, never interrupting, never reacting, never asking for anything. Until now, he'd never really seen her. And suddenly, he couldn't stop thinking about how her absence made the room feel heavier than it should. Not because she was late, but because she left like always. And yet, something felt off. Maybe it was the way no one ever asked where she went. Maybe it was the way he never had, until today. He hesitated, then walked slowly to his desk. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity or something else, but it was strong enough to make him press the intercom. "Daniel, bring the car around, and I want you to follow someone." The black sedan moved silently along quiet roads, keeping distance behind a small silver hatchback. Richard sat in the back seat, eyes fixed on the taillights ahead, arms crossed, not sure what he was doing or why. "She's not going home," Daniel muttered from the front seat, breaking the silence as he signaled left. Richard frowned. "Keep following." Helen's car stopped in front of an old brick building with peeling paint and a flickering porch light. No sign, no office, just a fading banner that read, "Riverside Community Center." She stepped out wearing the same soft beige coat she always wore and carried a simple canvas tote bag over her shoulder. Richard watched as she greeted a woman in her 70s at the door. They hugged, not a professional handshake, a genuine, warm embrace. He leaned forward. "What is this place?" Daniel shrugged. "Community center, I think. I can wait here if you want to." "No, I want to see for myself." Inside, Richard kept to the hallway shadows. He didn't want to be seen, not by her, not by anyone. Through the glass of a classroom door, he saw her, Helen, standing at the front of a room with 5 elderly women sitting at a long table, laptops open, phones in hand. Confused expressions lit up with gentle laughter as Helen patiently helped one of them open a video call. "See, there she is," Helen said, smiling. "You just tap this, and your granddaughter will appear. Give it a second. There." The older woman gasped as a little girl's face appeared on screen, waving wildly. "I did it," the woman whispered, eyes welling. "I did it." Helen kneeled beside her, beaming. "Yes, you did." Richard stood frozen. The woman he barely noticed every day was here, changing lives after hours, and smiling in a way he had never seen before. He watched as she moved gracefully from one woman to the next, calming, encouraging, empowering. Her voice was soft but certain, her words simple but filled with love. She didn't check her phone once. She didn't glance at the time. She was completely there. It was nearly 8 p.m. when the class ended. The women hugged Helen tightly, thanking her again and again as they left, with their laptops clutched like treasure. Richard quickly turned back down the hallway, hiding behind a pillar. When Helen stepped out of the classroom, her expression shifted. Not tired, but quiet, like she'd poured herself out, and now needed the silence. She walked to a small utility closet near the end of the hall, opened it, and pulled out a mop and a bucket. She wasn't done. She was going to clean too. Richard watched in disbelief as she began mopping the classroom floor herself, sleeves rolled up, humming quietly. This woman, the same woman who answered phones at his office, who passed him coffee without meeting his eyes. She wasn't just anyone. She was everything he'd forgotten the world still had. He didn't go home that night thinking about numbers or deadlines. He lay awake thinking about her hands, how gently they guided those old women, how steady they were, even while wiping scuff marks from a floor no one else cared about. He thought about how he'd passed her in the hallway 1,000 times and never stopped to ask who she really was. Now he couldn't stop thinking about her. The next morning, Helen walked into the office at 8:59, just like always, hair neatly tied, blouse buttoned to the collar, soft shoes padding across the polished floor. Richard looked up as she passed his open door, and this time he said something. "Good morning." "Helen," she paused, surprised. "Good morning, sir." "Richard," he corrected softly. She blinked, then smiled, the smallest smile, and kept walking. But he'd seen it now, the light behind her eyes, and he wasn't going to forget it, not anymore. What will Richard do with this new side of Helen he's discovered? And how will Helen react if she finds out he followed her that night? Richard tried to go back to normal. He really did. But normal felt hollow now. Every time Helen passed his door, he noticed something new. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was focused, or how she always kept a small notebook in her lap during meetings. Even though no one asked her to, she wasn't just organized. She cared, quietly, constantly. That morning, while reviewing the quarterly reports, Richard caught himself rereading the same line over and over. "Helen," he called, "can you step in for a second?" She appeared, calm as always, clutching her notebook. "Yes, Richard?" He gestured to the chair across from him. Do you enjoy working here?" The question surprised her. It wasn't the kind of thing he ever asked. She hesitated. "I do. It's steady. And I'm grateful." "Grateful?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" She shrugged lightly. "A job where I can keep things in order. Where I don't have to talk too much." Richard studied her face. She wasn't lying, but there was something beneath the surface, a tension in her smile, a guard still up. "Have you always been this quiet?" he asked gently. Helen let out a soft breath and offered a polite smile. "I guess I learned it keeps life simpler." Richard nodded. He wanted to say more, tell her he knew, that he'd seen who she really was. But he didn't. He didn't know how. Not yet. That evening, Richard stood in the hallway outside his office, watching as Helen gathered her things. 4:57 p.m., as usual. She moved with precision, coat on, notebook tucked in her bag, desk perfectly cleared. He walked over. "You heading out?" he asked casually. She paused, startled. "Yes, it's almost 5. "Need a ride?" She tilted her head. "I drive." "I know," he said. Then quickly added, "Just thought it might be nice to chat on the way." Helen's eyes searched his face for a moment, then softened. "I appreciate it, Richard, but I have a place I need to be." He nodded slowly. "The community center?" Her face froze. For the first time since he'd known her, Helen looked afraid. "How do you—" He took a step back, realizing the weight of what he'd just confessed. I didn't mean to scare you. I just—" He sighed. "I saw you there, the other night." She stared at him. Her lips parted, but no words came. "I didn't follow you out of suspicion," he said quickly. "I was curious, and what I saw—" His voice faltered. "It changed something for me." Helen slowly lowered her bag. Her voice, when it came, was soft and careful. You had someone follow me? He swallowed. No, I did it myself. That seemed to make it worse. Why? She whispered. He stepped closer, regret thick in his voice. Because you're quiet and kind and different from everyone else in this building, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted to understand someone, not just manage them. Helen crossed her arms, clutching herself. You weren't supposed to see that part of me, she murmured. I know, Richard said, but I'm glad I did. She didn't speak to him for 2 days after that. No greetings in the hallway, no quiet smiles, just silence. And it hurt more than Richard expected. By Friday, he couldn't take it anymore. He walked into the break room where Helen was making tea and stood by the counter, unsure how to begin. I shouldn't have followed you, he said. It wasn't fair. You have a right to your private life. She stirred her tea, not looking at him. But I also want to be honest. Watching you with those women, I saw something that moved me. You were incredible. Finally, she looked at him, eyes softer now, but still guarded. You don't know anything about me, Richard. You're right, he replied, but I'd like to, if you'll let me. A beat of silence, then another, and then... Softly, Helen said, Why? He blinked. Why? Yes, she said, setting her tea down. Why me? You could talk to any woman in this building. Why the secretary who never says much? Why the woman who mops classroom floors at night? He didn't have a rehearsed answer, so he told the truth. Because I've spent years surrounded by people who only want to impress or be impressed. But you live with purpose, not for attention, not for praise. You just do good things because they matter. Helen stared at him. I've built a company, he continued, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to build a life. Watching you that night, I realized I'd forgotten what heart looks like. She blinked, taken aback. Richard stepped back slightly, his voice gentler now. I'm not asking for anything, Helen. Just a chance to know the person behind the silence. She didn't answer that day, but the next morning, a note was on his desk, folded once, written in neat, slanted handwriting. Community Center. Saturday, 4 p.m. You can mop with me if you really want to understand. No signature. Just that. Richard smiled, reading it twice. He would be there. They're starting to let their walls down. But opening the door to someone else also means revealing old wounds. What is Helen hiding? And is Richard really ready to see the full truth? The sound of a mop sliding across the tile echoed softly through the empty community center. It was 4:17 p.m., Saturday. Richard was wearing jeans, for the first time in years. He felt like an imposter in them, awkward and overdressed at the same time. Helen didn't comment. She handed him a mop and pointed to the other end of the classroom. You missed a spot, she said, her voice lighter than usual. He smiled, grateful for the tease. They worked in silence at first, not uncomfortable silence, just the kind that fills the space between two people still figuring out how to exist around each other without masks. At 5 p.m. she dropped her mop into the bucket and pushed her sleeves up. Come on, there's someone I want you to meet. Down the hall, in a smaller room that smelled faintly of cinnamon and cleaning solution, an elderly woman sat flipping through a photo album. She looked up and smiled wide when she saw Helen. There she is. My sweet girl. Helen walked over and hugged her gently. Hi, Rosa. The woman's eyes shifted to Richard. And who's this? A new recruit? Helen hesitated. This is Richard, my friend. It was the first time he'd heard her call him that. Rosa extended her hand with delight. I'm Rosa. I taught this one how to bake her first cinnamon roll when she was just 16. She burnt the first batch but kept coming back. Richard's eyes flicked to Helen, who was blushing slightly. She never told me she could bake. She never tells anyone anything, Rosa said with a wink. But she's got more heart in her pinky finger than most people have in their whole body. Helen shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. She stood and gently squeezed Rosa's shoulder. I'll come by tomorrow, okay? You always do, Rosa said, eyes warm. Don't let this one go. He looks like he's finally waking up." They laughed, but Helen's smile dimmed just a little. Outside, as the sun dipped low and painted the pavement gold, they walked together toward Helen's car. "You used to come here when you were 16?" Richard asked. She nodded. "Why?" She paused, then said quietly, "It was the only place that felt safe." Richard stopped walking. Helen kept her eyes forward. "Home wasn't easy. My mom worked nights. My dad didn't always come home sober. When he did, it was worse." He stayed silent. "The center gave me a place to go after school. Rosa took me in like a granddaughter. She taught me how to make food, help others, and how to listen." She turned to him now. "That's why I don't talk much. People say more when you just listen." Richard's throat tightened. He had spent so much of his life talking, directing, deciding. But here she was, someone who had learned to heal by listening, and now he was listening too. They sat on a bench just outside the building. Helen hugged her coat tighter around her. "You don't talk much about yourself either," she said. Looking at him sideways, he smiled faintly. "Probably because I've spent so long pretending I already had everything figured out." "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm sitting outside a community center with a mop blister and wondering how I ever ran a company thinking I knew what mattered." Helen chuckled softly. "Don't sell yourself short, you're not hopeless." He glanced at her. "That almost sounds like a compliment." She smiled. "Don't get used to it." They didn't touch. They didn't make promises. But for the first time, they were both exactly where they wanted to be, present, honest, and gently leaning into something neither of them had expected. Monday morning, Helen came into the office at the usual time, but this time she didn't just pass Richard's door. She paused, knocked once. He looked up, surprised, and maybe just a little nervous. "I brought you something," she said, holding a small white box. He opened it, a single, perfect cinnamon roll. Still warm. Richard grinned. "Did you burn the first batch again?" She raised an eyebrow. "Nope, I'm better now." He picked it up and took a bite. It was sweet, buttery, soft, and somehow the most comforting thing he'd tasted in years. "I didn't know I needed this," he said. "You probably needed it more than you think," Helen replied. "We all do." But later that day, as she left for her lunch break, a woman stopped by Richard's office, tall, confident, high heels echoing against the tile. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "I'm looking for Helen." He blinked. "She's on break. Can I help you?" The woman stepped closer. "I'm her sister." Richard straightened in his chair. "I've been trying to reach her for weeks," the woman said sharply, "but Helen doesn't return my calls anymore." He opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. "She's hiding things," the woman continued, "and if she hasn't told you about our family, then I suggest you ask her again." Richard stared at her. A tightness forming in his chest. The woman left a card on his desk. "Marianne Blake, attorney at law." And then she turned and walked away. Helen returned 20 minutes later, smiling with 2 coffees in hand. But Richard's smile had faded, and Helen noticed. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Your sister was here." Helen's face went pale. The coffees trembled slightly in her hands. "I see," she said. And just like that, the wall came back up, thick, cold, familiar. "Excuse me," she said, her voice now flat. "I need to take care of something." She turned and walked away, and walked, leaving Richard with one thought swirling in his mind. What was she still hiding? And why did it hurt so much to feel her slip away again? Who is Helen really? And what is this family history she's trying to escape? Richard thought he was ready to know the truth. But some truths come with pain you can't unsee. Helen didn't come in the next day. No text, no call. Her desk was empty, neatly arranged, like she'd never been there at all. Richard stared at the vacant chair from his office, feeling a strange, hollow weight settle in his chest. She'd shut down the moment he mentioned her sister. That gentle openness from the weekend, gone, like it never existed. And he couldn't stop wondering, why? That evening, just before leaving, he opened the card Helen's sister had left. Marianne Blake. He tapped the number into his phone and hesitated. His thumb hovered over call. Then slowly, he lowered the phone. No. If he wanted the truth, it had to come from Helen. He owed her that. Wednesday morning, she came back, hair tied tighter than usual, eyes tired, smile gone. Richard stood the moment she walked past. "Helen," he called gently. She paused, turned slowly. "I just wanted to see if you're okay," he said carefully. "I'm fine," she replied. Tone clipped. It was just a personal matter. He stepped into the hallway closer to her. "Your sister, she said some things." Helen's face stiffened. "She always does." "I didn't ask for details," he added quickly. "I just want to understand why her showing up hurt you so much." Helen looked around. The hallway was quiet. Still. She let out a slow breath. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to scare you away." His eyes softened. "You couldn't." She gave him a small, sad smile. "Don't be so sure." That night she called him. Her voice was quieter than usual. Not calm, but fragile. "Can we talk? Somewhere away from everything?" They met at a quiet park outside the city. It was late. Stars blinked above. A breeze rustled the trees. Helen sat on a bench, hugging her arms tightly across her chest. "My real last name isn't Carter," she said. "It's Blake. Helen Blake." Richard didn't interrupt. "My sister Marianne and we were close once, before my dad died." She stared straight ahead, into the dark. He was a lawyer like her, big, respected. But behind closed doors, her voice faltered. She swallowed. There was yelling, slamming doors, broken glass, sometimes worse. Richard's hands clenched on his knees. "My mother left when I was 12. Said she couldn't take it anymore. Left us with him. Marianne was 17. She pretended it didn't affect her. She buried it. Became exactly who he wanted her to be. Perfect. Polished. Untouchable." She turned to look at Richard. "But I broke. I didn't want to be like them. I didn't want law school or long, empty dinners in big houses. I just wanted peace." Richard stayed silent, his chest tight. "When he died, Marianne and I had a fight over the will, over who he was. I didn't want anything from him, not even his name." She looked down at her hands. "So I changed it. Moved here, got the first quiet job I could find. And I started teaching those women because I remembered how it felt to not understand the world around you, to feel lost in silence. Alone." Richard blinked, emotion clouding his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Helen gave a tiny nod. "I just needed a place where I wasn't somebody's problem or pity project. I wanted to build something on my own, even if it was small." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who filed papers without complaint, who taught grandmothers how to FaceTime, who mopped floors after class and never asked for thanks. "You've built more than you think," he said gently. "And none of it is small." She looked at him, surprised. "I don't want to fix you," he added. "I just want to be close enough to see who you really are." Helen let out a shaky breath. "I'm not used to that. People seeing me and staying." "Well," Richard said, sliding a little closer, "I'm not most people." They sat in silence a while, the stars still above, the world quiet. "I'm scared, Richard," she whispered. "Of what?" "That if you really let me in, I might let you in too. And I don't know what happens after that." He smiled softly. "Maybe we figure it out together." The next day, Helen returned to the office with a little more warmth in her voice. She greeted the receptionist by name, gave someone directions to the restroom, even cracked a small joke at the copier. And when she passed Richard's door, she didn't just wave. She paused and winked. Later that week, during lunch, they sat together in the office courtyard. Richard told her about his late mother, a painter who never got to show her work, and how his life had turned into numbers and meetings because it was safer than feeling too much. Helen listened, and for the first time he saw it. The way she leaned in, how her hand lingered near his on the bench, almost close enough to touch. But she didn't pull away, not this time. That night, back at her apartment, Helen stood by her bedroom window, staring into the quiet city. She thought about all the things she still hadn't told him, and then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe because you disappeared? Don't forget where you came from. He left things behind, and I'm going to find them." Helen's breath caught. Her heart dropped. She knew that voice. Even if the number was new, it wasn't her sister. It was someone else, someone from the past she thought she'd buried for good. Just when she was learning to trust again, a shadow from Helen's past resurfaces. What did her father leave behind? And who's trying to pull her back into the life she escaped? Helen didn't sleep that night. She sat curled on the floor of her bedroom, knees to her chest, the anonymous message glowing on her screen. He left things behind, and I'm going to find them. 12 words. But they felt like a fist around her throat. She read them again and again, until the words blurred through unshed tears. She hadn't heard from him in years. And now, out of nowhere, he was back. Mark Turner, her father's former assistant. Trusted, loyal, and secretly twisted in a way no one had known, until it was too late. The next morning, Helen sat at her desk like usual, calm on the outside, but inside, her heart thudded in her ears. She didn't notice Richard standing in his doorway until he spoke. "You okay?" She jumped. Her hands flew to her lap, covering her phone. "Yeah, just tired," she murmured. He stepped closer. "Helen, if something's wrong, you can tell me." She hesitated, then forced a smile. "It's nothing, really." Richard didn't believe her, but he knew better than to push. Still, the flicker in her eyes. He'd seen it before. Fear? At lunch, she avoided him. At 5 o'clock sharp, she vanished like smoke. But this time, Richard followed. Not to invade, not out of curiosity, but because something felt wrong. He found her not at the community center, but sitting alone in a corner booth of a small cafe. She stared out the window, stirring a cold cup of tea that she hadn't touched. Richard walked in slowly, unsure how she'd react. When she saw him, she didn't speak, just looked at him with tired eyes. He sat across from her without asking. Silence hung between them. Then she slid her phone across the table. The message glowed. Richard read it once. His jaw clenched. "Who sent this?" Helen swallowed hard. "His name's Mark Turner. He worked for my father. Managed his documents, finances, everything. After the funeral, he contacted me, said there were papers my dad left behind, claimed I was entitled to something." "What kind of papers?" "I don't know," she said. "But I told him I wanted no part of it, that I wanted to move on. He didn't take it well." Richard's voice dropped. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "He started showing up outside my apartment, leaving notes, calling from blocked numbers. I filed a report once, but there wasn't enough to charge him with anything. And then he just disappeared." Her voice trembled now. "I thought he was gone." Richard reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. "You're not alone anymore, Helen." She looked up, her eyes swimming. "What if this ruins everything? What if I let you in, and all I do is drag you into something dark?" He gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe I want to be there, even in the dark." The next day, Richard called his head of security. "Run a background check on a man named Mark Turner. I need everything you can find, quietly." He didn't tell Helen, not yet. But he had a bad feeling, and he wasn't going to wait for the next message. 2 days later, Helen received a package at the front desk. No return address. Inside, a manila envelope. She sat in the break room, trembling as she opened it. Inside were black and white photocopies, contracts, account ledgers, a scanned signature, her father's, and a handwritten note. "Your father wasn't just a lawyer. Helen, he was dirty, and he left the cleanup to me. Now you're going to help fix what he started, or I tell the world what you're really running from." Helen's breath caught. She had no idea what any of it meant. but the weight of the threat was crystal clear. She took the envelope straight to Richard's office. He looked up as she entered, and the moment he saw her face, he stood. "What is it?" She handed him the file without a word. As he flipped through the pages, his expression hardened. "These are financial transfers, shell accounts, international wires." He was hiding something big. Helen gripped the edge of the desk. "But I never knew. I swear. I didn't know any of this." Richard looked up. "I believe you." He said it with no hesitation. And for the first time in days, Helen exhaled. That night, Richard sat in his apartment, poring over the files. He wasn't a forensic accountant, but he didn't need to be. These weren't just old secrets. They were dangerous, and someone out there wanted to use them, and her, as leverage. The next morning, Helen received another text. "I'll be at the center Saturday night. You'll come alone, or the documents go public." Her hands shook. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, she texted Richard, "We need to talk. It's happening this weekend." That Saturday, they met in the back parking lot of the community center. The sun was just beginning to set. Helen wore a gray hoodie. Her face was pale but determined. Richard had insisted she not go alone, but she was equally clear. She wouldn't let him get hurt, so they compromised. She would meet Mark inside. Richard would wait nearby, listening, watching. At 7:04 p.m., Helen walked into the classroom. Mark was already there, a man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and sharp eyes. He held a leather folder like it was loaded. "You've grown up," he said like it was a compliment. "You look just like her." Helen's stomach twisted. "What do you want, Mark?" He stepped closer. "Justice, closure, call it whatever you want. Your father made deals that buried people, innocent people. I cleaned up every one of them for years. And he promised me a piece of the fortune. Guess what I got?" Helen didn't answer. "Nothing?" Mark hissed. But he left clues. "And now I want what I'm owed." "I don't have anything," she said. "I walked away from all of it." "You have the name, the sympathy, the clean image. You're the perfect face for this. Help me unlock the last piece and we both walk away rich." Helen's voice hardened. "Or what?" He smirked. "Or I burn it all down. Your father's name, yours, everything you've built." There was a creak, a floorboard in the hallway. Mark's head snapped toward the door. "What was that?" Helen didn't flinch, but her heart thundered. Helen's past is no longer a shadow. It's standing in front of her, threatening everything. Can she protect the life she's rebuilt? And will Richard risk everything to stand beside her when it all unravels? The creak from the hallway echoed like thunder in the small classroom. Mark's eyes narrowed. "You brought someone, didn't you?" Helen's jaw tightened, but she stayed where she was. "You think I'd walk into this alone?" Mark's calm cracked. "This was supposed to be between us. You and me. No interference." She took a step forward, her voice low and steady. "You showed up in my life with threats and blackmail. You stalked me. You dug up the very thing I spent years trying to heal from. You don't get to demand how this ends." Mark slammed the folder down on the desk beside him. "You don't get it. Your father ruined people. I was one of them. And now you're his legacy. That makes this your responsibility too." "No," said a voice behind him. Mark spun. Richard stepped into the room, calm, sharp, a phone in his hand, screen glowing. "Conversation's been recorded from the start, already backed up to 3 cloud servers." Mark's face twisted. "Who the hell are you?" Richard didn't answer. He didn't need to. The shift in energy was instant. Mark took a step back, suddenly aware he was no longer in control. "You think a few recordings will stop me?" he spat. "That folder contains enough to start a war. Offshore accounts, buried bribes, names that go higher than you think." Richard crossed his arms. "Then let it burn. But Helen doesn't owe you anything. She didn't make those deals. She didn't hide that money. Your war isn't with her." Mark's hand shook now. "If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me." Helen stepped forward, her voice quiet but piercing. "Then go. But don't ever come near me again." He glared at her, a man on the edge of something dark, but he saw the resolve in her eyes, and for the first time, he backed down. Mark grabbed the folder, stuffed it into a briefcase, and stormed out. No last words, no threats, just footsteps growing fainter in the hallway. When the door finally shut behind him, Helen collapsed onto a chair, her shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of it all finally coming off. Richard knelt beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, breathless. "I think so." Then looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to be here." "I did," he said, "because when someone matters to you, you show up, especially when it's messy." Later that night, they sat in Richard's car outside her apartment building. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the things they'd just faced, the things left unspoken. Helen stared out the window, her voice soft. "I spent so long thinking I had to be invisible, that it was safer, cleaner, easier." She turned to him. "But I don't want to hide anymore." Richard reached over, brushing her hand with his fingers. "Then don't." Their hands touched. This time she didn't pull away. 2 days passed, then 3. No messages, no packages, no sign of Mark. Richard's security team tracked his movements. He'd withdrawn a large sum of money and fled the state. Gone, but not forgotten. At the office, people started noticing a shift. Helen smiled more. Not just polite smiles, real ones. She stayed late once or twice, not because she had to, but because she wanted to sit with Richard in the break room and talk about life. About her dream to open a digital literacy nonprofit for seniors someday. About his mom's art and how he finally hung one of her forgotten paintings in his office. They didn't define anything, no labels, no rushing, but something was blooming, steady and warm. Something neither of them had expected. One quiet Friday evening, Richard waited outside the community center. Helen emerged after class, a little smudge of whiteboard marker on her cheek. He laughed. "You look like you've been in battle." She rolled her eyes and wiped it away. Margaret got a little too excited trying to draw a mouse icon. He opened the passenger door for her. "Dinner?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, dinner sounds good." They ended up at a small, tucked-away Italian place Helen loved but had never told anyone about. Over pasta and soft music, she asked, "Do you ever feel like you're finally living after years of just existing?" Richard looked at her for a long moment. "I do now." After dinner, he walked her to her door. She paused with her key in hand. "You know what scares me," she whispered. He tilted his head. "That this, whatever it is, might be real. And I've never had something real last." He reached out, gently tucked her hair behind her ear. "Then let's not rush it. Let's build it slow, brick by brick." She leaned in, close, so close their foreheads touched. And in that quiet moment, everything felt possible. But just as Helen started to believe in peace, a message appeared in Richard's inbox. Subject line, "You should know who you're falling for." Attached, a file, images, notes, a surveillance photo of Helen, and one sentence. "She's not who you think she is." Richard froze. The warmth he felt minutes ago turned cold in his chest. He didn't call her, not that night. He just sat at his desk, reading, rereading, and wondering, was it true? Or was someone trying to break what they were finally starting to build? Just when trust begins to grow, a new threat tries to poison everything. Can love survive the shadows of doubt? Or will the past win after all? Richard stared at the screen, barely breathing. The message was anonymous. The tone, cold, calculated. The content, chilling. "You should know who you're falling for." Attached were images, dates, a photo of Helen. Outside a bank, another, entering a lawyer's office. Documents, snippets of financial records from years ago, with her name linked to one of her father's offshore accounts. The implication was clear, that Helen hadn't just run from her father's legacy. She'd been part of it. Richard leaned back in his chair, hands trembling slightly. He didn't want to believe it. But the doubt slipped in like cracks in glass. Had she known more than she said? Had she played him? He picked up his phone, typed her name. His finger hovered over call, then stopped. No, he had to see her. He had to see, face to face. Helen was finishing up at the community center when he arrived. She smiled when she saw him at the door, but it faded the moment she saw his face. Richard? He didn't say anything at first, just held up his phone, showed her the message. She read it, scrolled through the photos, slowly, carefully, and then she just sat down, not in shock, not in panic, almost like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Is it true?" he asked softly. She looked up, her eyes tired but clear. "Yes." Richard's chest tightened. "You were involved?" Helen shook her head. "Not the way it looks." She gestured for him to sit. "When my father died, Marianne got the estate. I got silence. But one day, a lawyer showed up with a sealed envelope. Inside was a single key and a bank name. No note, no instructions." She exhaled slowly. "I didn't touch it for months. But curiosity got the better of me. I went to the bank. The account was in my name, but I'd never opened it. It had money. A lot. More than I'd ever seen. No explanation." She paused. "I transferred it to a trust, used it to quietly fund the center, the senior program, college tuition for 3 of the girls I tutor on Saturdays. I never took a cent for myself." Richard stared at her. "You were afraid to tell me?" "I was afraid of what it would look like," she whispered, "that people would think I was just like him." She met his eyes, and he saw it. The pain, the guilt, the deep-rooted fear of being misunderstood. "I'm not perfect," she said, "but I never lied to hurt you. I've only ever tried to make something good from what was left behind." Silence filled the room. Then Richard stood. Helen braced herself. But instead of walking away, he stepped forward and knelt in front of her. "I believe you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've watched you give, Helen, when no one was watching, when there was nothing in it for you. You're not like your father. You never were." She broke then, not from pain, but from the relief of finally being seen fully. He wrapped his arms around her, and she didn't resist. They stayed there, in the quiet of that humble room, 2 people who had come through fire and somehow still reached for each other. Weeks passed. The anonymous sender was traced. Mark Turner, again. He'd tried one final play, a desperate attempt to destroy what he couldn't control. Richard pressed charges. This time, they stuck. Harassment, fraud, extortion, and finally, justice. 1 month later, Helen stood in front of a small crowd at the community center. A new sign hung behind her. Blake House Digital Literacy and Hope Center. Named not after her father, but as a symbol of reclaiming her story, on her own terms. Richard stood off to the side, watching. She caught his eye mid-speech and smiled. She wasn't just his secretary anymore. She was a leader, a healer, a woman standing in her own light. That night they walked together along the quiet sidewalk. "You okay?" he asked. Helen nodded. "I think I finally am." They stopped outside her apartment building. She turned to him. "You've seen every part of me now, the messy stuff, the stuff I wish wasn't real." He took her hand gently. "And I'd still choose you. Every time." A pause, then she said, "I love you, Richard." Soft, honest, free. He smiled, eyes glistening. "I love you too." No fireworks, no grand gestures, just 2 souls who almost missed each other and chose not to. Epilogue. 6 months later. Helen's nonprofit had helped over 200 seniors reconnect with family through technology. Richard had started stepping back from daily operations, trading boardrooms for late afternoons, volunteering at the center. One time, a woman asked him if he was Helen's assistant. He laughed. "Something like that." Their love wasn't flashy. It was quiet, steady, built not on perfect beginnings, but on brave, vulnerable middles. and that made it stronger than either of them had ever known love could be. The end? Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who carry the deepest stories, the quiet warriors who live not for applause, but for purpose. Helen didn't need to be rescued. She just needed someone to believe in her long enough for her to believe in herself again. What about you? Have you ever misjudged someone or felt misjudged yourself, only to realize there was so much more beneath the surface? Drop your story in the comments. I'll be reading everyone.